uh, that's coming out of Miami, and then more recently, an AI startup called Climb um, that is founded by Accenture's former head of digital transformation. Um, and at that point, the remuneration is equity. So you're as an early stage company, you're equity rich, you're cash poor. Um, you choose some great advisors, and you dilute your company, let's say 2%. You should get dramatically more than that 2% back in your next funding round. I just can't imagine that. There's a lot of resistance to using advisors. Um, and I would just say that think that through very carefully. Um, and the other thing is, don't be uncomfortable about retiring an advisor. They can be very valuable in some early stages, and then as soon as you hire somebody with the skill set, you don't need that advisor anymore. It's okay to retire an advisor. And likewise, sometimes an advisor can convert to being a consultant or even an employee if it makes sense. I'm already really excited about my own AI startup. We'll see what happens there. Um, where can you find an advisor? Well, the mentors are a really good place to find the advisor. You have, I've made myself available for unlimited mentoring conversations with the cohort here. If you're here for the 27th, you had an opportunity to grab that. But I've only had like 4 of you actually book a call with me, and that's fine. I don't need to have you book a call with me. There are a ton of great mentors here in the Founder Institute, or if you do work with any other accelerators with those accelerators, and they give you a real taste on what it's like to work with somebody. Find someone that you can work with. Again, this is part of your networking process, is meeting it. If someone's willing to volunteer as a mentor, they're willing to meet with you as a founder. Other sources of advisors, the people who did what you did in the version Web 1.0 or Web 2.0, right? Those are people that have a lot of knowledge going through what you went through. Serial advisors, there's a bunch of those out there. And then any experts you encounter through networking. Great place to present Founder Institute's FAST agreement. It's excellent guidance on what in the world is the standard rate to pay an advisor. In my case, I charge double what Founder Institute says, but I think that the research is really solid on the compensation rates for advisor. It's a great legal contract. I will say that top advisors may introduce some additional clauses, in particular front-end loading, right? So it's not an even amount of vesting. There's more vesting up front and then it trickles down, or an acceleration clause. I can promise you that if your startup does really well and you have an advisor in your portfolio and you get due diligence from, let's say, Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz, they're going to look at your cap table. They're going to say, who's this guy I've never met? Oh, that's our marketing advisor. She's really helping us out. Okay, and that relationship, we've got operating partners who can help with that. And so an acceleration clause just removes that moral hazard. Winding down here, fractional executives, great, again, use of resources, keeping your cash flow where you need it. Most common fractionals that I'm seeing are the chief marketing officer, and head of HR roles. A lot of these people so I'm working with probably the top CMO out of New York. She has no plan to ever be an employee. She wants to be a fractional CMO. So those people, the fractionals, are unlikely to want to be an employee later. Consultants and contractors, excellent place for project-based work. Also a great place to sort of try before you buy, right? If you're networking, you meet someone, you're interested in ham, might need a full-time employee, they might be willing to do a project for you on a contract basis, and that's a great way to get to know them. And then lastly, advisors, once your equity has increased in value, if it makes sense to continue with them, you can convert them to a consultant. There. That's it. So again, while you're in the cohort, while your cohort still exists, I'm willing to meet with anybody in the Founder Institute cohort, spring cohort. Again, you can screenshot that and grab that and book a meeting with me. Any questions and time remaining to do questions just to give people a sense? You're taking tracking time?
Yeah, I think Noreen is still doing that. Yeah, any questions? Anybody?
It looks like there's some in the chat.
Well, let's take a look at the chat here. When you say pay, so I like to say remunerate. If I said pay, sorry. So early stage, you're equity rich and cash poor. So that is you're generally getting equity compensation in the early days, and then the later days you're moving off of equity compensation. Some might want a skin in the game situation, but if you're a Series C or something later like that, there's not a lot of value in stock at that point for an advisor who's just getting compensated in stock. And that's all I see in terms of questions. Anybody else have a question before we move on to the next amazing mentor here? All righty. Thank you very much, folks.
Maybe not. Yeah, we can go to Abdullah.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me, guys? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. So, please call me biased, but this session actually is the most important session in the Founder Institute. Just for the reason is that you can have the best idea in the world. If the execution is poor, I promise you that's one of the ways that any startup they cannot succeed. So whatever you're doing, give me just 5 minutes, and I promise you, you will gain a lot of knowledge. Okay. So for the people who doesn't know me, I'm just gonna put slide share. So for the people who doesn't know me, my name is Abdullah. You can just call me Abe for short. I found a startup that's in the HR tech industry. I have 7 years experience actually working in the HR, and I'm also affiliated with the World Bank. I work as a consultant for youth employment. So there is something that is actually very known, and it says it's not how many you can bring, but it's how many you can keep. You need to understand the status quo about your startup at the moment. First, you are competing for talent with giant companies, okay? Microsoft, I don't know, Google, Meta, whatever. You are competing with the same, basically for the same talent that they are acquiring at the moment. And you have to understand also that actually you're number one, that what takes where the money is gonna go actually in the payroll. So it's very important to take consideration into these two facts, because actually they're going to play a big effect on your startup. So I just basically break my presentation into two, the co-founder side, and then we're going to go to the employee. So when we talk about the co-founder, when you're going to attract the right co-founder, it's very important to have specific criteria before start searching. I have worked with so many startups, and I found out that most of them, they really don't know what they're looking for. They think that just because someone who worked at Apple, worked at big giant companies, it means those people are very startup friendly, which is not the case. You have to understand that those people who work in these companies, they have all the necessary resources, financial resources, they have budget, they have basically support, they have all the process that's already made. All they have to do is to follow the guideline during their company. But you are not the same. You are a startup. You still don't have like guidelines. You don't have like regulations inside your startup. You don't have nothing. You are still building. So It doesn't mean that someone who works in big companies, it means that he's going to perform well in your company. So before we start looking for the right co-founder, we need to ask the question, the first one, what is the personal motivation of that individual to join my startup? Because for the reason is that, startup journey, there's always ups and downs. There's a lot of bumps in the road. You need to make sure that those individuals, they have a motivation that makes sense to you. Whether they face like the problem that you're trying to solve, whether they have like a trauma they probably faced before and they want to make a change. That makes sense, okay? Because you don't want people who just want to join you to take equity or to take money. I mean, you get paid and then at the end, he's going to leave you for a job like basically Matthew was mentioning earlier. You want someone who really emotionally invested into your startup. The second, you need looking for someone with personality who has interest in collaboration. You're not looking for a lone wolf, for someone who just, wants to do things by himself and doesn't want to report to anyone. Okay, you're looking for someone who is just like you, like to collaborate together and take decisions together. It's like a marriage. We hear that all the time. It's a marriage, basically a relationship, taking decisions together. And those people, they accept the fact that the road is not going to be like something like very linear. It's going to be something actually a lot of chaos, a lot of, darkness. You're not going to know what's at the end of the tunnel. You're not going to know what kind of things that's going to happen. So those people are going to embrace such a discovery process that's going to help you actually to dodge any bullets that's going to come in front of you. So there is a framework that we use in the HR industry. We call it the EKS framework. E stands for experience, K for knowledge, and S for skills. And a lot of people actually, they confuse the skills and experience. Just because someone who worked in 10 years experience in a specific industry, they think that they have the skills that you need, which is not the case. Because you have to understand that someone who worked maybe in the HR tech for 10 years, it doesn't mean he's going to perform well in the fintech industry. It's two different careers, it's two different paths, it's two different experiences, and you develop a two different type of skill set doing your work. So please keep paying attention into that experience. Doesn't mean it's a skills, and knowledge is something pretty common like diploma and whatever. So there is the three places where you can find the co-founders at the moment. I'm sure that a lot of people that told you, hey, go to LinkedIn, go to industry events. This is something that's very known, but there is other places that I highly recommend actually to go and meet people. Founders List, Co-Founders Lab, StarHawk. There's also the YC mentorship, the Co-Founders Match. All these places you can find what you're looking for once you create your job description for, of course, for the talent that you're going to have as a co-founder. So one of the best practices that I highly recommend is that, first of all, you need to communicate your vision as early as possible. Because usually what happens is that the vision is not communicated. People don't know what to say. So they don't know what the future is going to look like. And what's going to happen is that conflict is going to happen after when specific or strategic decisions is going to be. So please make sure that you're going to say, hey, I want to achieve this specific goal. This is my North Star metric from here to 5 years. If you're going to communicate that early, it's going to be so much better. It's going to avoid you a lot of conflict. 2, define the co-founder's job description. You need to write down exactly what your co-founder is going to work, so you can basically measure the performance of your co-founder and see if they are doing a good job. 3, share your feelings. It doesn't mean that you feel frustrated about someone who did something wrong or you didn't like basically specific things. You keep it to yourself. Tell them that you didn't like the fact you didn't like the fact that you did this and you did that. That's gonna help you to have like a really healthy communication and just avoid conflict to begin with. Okay, no resentment is gonna be. It's gonna be basically built, but actually it's a good thing because you can solve problems at early stages instead of they're gonna build up and then they're gonna explode. And 4, sign agreements. So many startups out there, they just meet, they see, oh, I like this dude, he's amazing, we're gonna work together and whatever, and then they sign nothing. If you're not gonna sign agreements, you're not gonna basically protect your business, or you're not gonna protect yourself or protect the co-founders, other co-founder, basically rights and other stuff. Anyways, for the team, I'm not gonna dig deep into the team. You have to understand that in the beginning, it's gonna be you who's gonna be in the front of hiring the right people into your startup. So it's very important to understand the entire process and how it works. I think Matthew have mentioned like so many interesting how to do so. Highly recommended to know exactly to pick the right apple to be in your startup. You're not looking to have like an apple that's going to destroy the rest of the bucket. You're looking for someone who's going to bring value. And it's not only about, technical skills, but also interpersonal and behavioral skills that can play a big difference actually in a startup. So one of the best practices that I highly recommend is that you need to adopt skills first approach. It doesn't mean someone who doesn't have a degree, that someone is he's bad. Actually, there's a lot of people who doesn't have degree and they have developed specific skill set that help you like as problem solving, as decision making. That's probably even like someone who worked in a big company, he didn't have decision before, he never basically understand how to take decision into an organization. He's just maybe, an IC, individual contributor. So he's not going to help you with taking like leadership decision. So please focus on adopt on skills first approach because it's going to open for you more talent pool. Second, hire for company culture. If someone doesn't have your values, who doesn't have basically, who is ready actually to put the company culture into the organization, those are not the right people. So please make sure that the company culture is something to sustain the productivity of your startup. 3, you don't have to hire people for full-time. You can always hire consultants and freelancers who can get a specific job to be done. And actually, one of the fourth, probably the thing that I have seen is that creating an amazing job description plays a big role actually in attracting the right talent. So compensation, almost done, I promise. So for the co-founders, we have equity. If you have there's 2 clans actually in equity. There's some people who believes in equality, and there's some people who believes, no, I'm just going to give the person, depends on the stage of the startup. So there is no right or wrong answer. It depends on the negotiation. I personally, one of the people that believe in the equality. So I have actually given the basically vesting period and vesting things to my co-founders. So if you have 2, 3 co-founders, that is great. If you have a 4th co-founder, please ask yourself, is it really worth it? C stands for the cliff. It means that before anyone who's going to join your startup who's going to invest, you're not going to give him anything. This is basically try to see it as a trial period to see if that individual is someone who worth it. And then starting from the first 12 months, you're going to give them like 20% of the stock vested instantly on the spot. And then you can vest quarterly or monthly or 6 monthly, it depends biannually or whatever. And then at the end, you need to understand that every co-founders agreement, there is a triggers. Like let's say that Google acquired you, you can easily basically have some triggers that is going to basically protect you and protect the other co-founders. So for the employees, there is base salary, bonuses, and also ESOP, stands for employee share options. This is the only way actually that for startup that can attract like individuals to their organization is by providing them like optional shares into the company. I'm not jumping into this analysis of salaries at the moment, but I would try to make office hours available so we can have like really deep conversation on how basically what kind of problems that you're facing and how can we overcome them. So yeah. Any questions? And I promise I don't bite.
There is question in the chat.
Okay.
At least a couple of them. So I can repeat, like Deepak has asked, how about founding XYZ where they are the first hire in a particular functional domain as an expert, but still not a co-founder? Can they be given generous equity?
I'm going to try to read the question so everyone can understand what the question is. So basically, how about founding XYZ where they are first hired in a particular functional domain as an expert, but still not a co-founder? They can get given generous equity through the right partnership. The answer is, it can be, I can see that Alex said that 1099 can be a way. That's a good starting point. But if that person is a key in your business and without him, actually the business is not gonna run, basically it's too risky because you have to understand that people talks. People go to Reddit, people go to Quora, people go to different platforms, but they see what's going on out there. So you don't want to risk it to begin with, but I prefer to lock them with the equity and with a vesting period. You're not going to get all that equity all at once. Like you can do it at 4 years, at 3 years. So you make sure that individual to stay in your business, because if they leave, they're not going to get anything. So it is more, I mean, if that individual is very important to your business, you want to keep them, especially at these early stages. You don't want basically a house that has a full of argument, because investors are not going to invest in your startup. First one, that's the first condition that's, I mean, an investor is going to invest in is the team. You need to understand the team, and you're going to go through a due diligence process, and one of them is the team. Oh, yeah. Yeah, correct, Jay. Correct. Any other question? Are you facing any problems with your team that we can discuss? Maybe we can find a solution for it right now. Take advantage of the mentors. All right. Okay. So thank you, and looking forward for the pitches.
Thank you, Abdullah. That was really very practical approach to the whole thing. It's not rocket science, but it's very, very, I think it's a very important thing to have a good team. And more than anything, I think even for the investors, team is one of the top criteria of why they would invest in you. So,
yeah, and you have to understand one thing about investors. These are people, they're not only like technical savvy, or they are not only numbers people. Actually, they can see, they can smell if there is any conflict in any startups. Like if you are facing any issue with your team or whatever, before raising fund, please talk it internally and create frameworks. It's okay sometimes just go to the Founder Institute mentors and tell them, hey, I'm facing this problem. What can I do? What is the best practices that I can do? It's always a good thing to build your foundation on the right foundation. So once you go out there, you're going to go and scale. So my yeah, I think Sean has a question.
So yeah, just a quick question. What's your take on not having co-founders, but having a founding team?
What's the difference?
Like, so co-founder is like somebody that has maybe equal equity. But a founding team could just be maybe like their part, they would have like, let's say, options in the company, but not, not a group that I would say they are co-founders.
Yeah.
Or maybe core team is a more accurate name for it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, how is it? The question is, the right question should be how it's going to be perceived when you're going to sit during the data room or during like the due diligence process with the investors, how it will be perceived. I think it will be perceived that your team is not committed enough, because actually investors, they're looking for people who are fully committed, and they jumped and they are 100% into the startup idea, and they put their money, they risk it all just because they want to succeed so badly. So maybe, I mean, we as human beings, we don't take signals in a good, actually heartwarming like the old generation, but we usually, when we see something, we say, I don't know about that. That's maybe something I am not comfortable with. And I highly recommend to have a co-founder, because the stats showing that 94% of the startups that raise its fund, actually, they all have co-founders. Only 6% they have solo founders. And at the moment, you are considered as a solo founder. So because it's a 0 or 1, it's not something in between.
Thank you.
Yep.
Christina, do you want to go ahead? Oh, anybody's question? No.
I got a quick question. So when you have when you do have a team or a person who's on your team that's not necessarily the co-founder, but they are either a CTO, an executive C-level suite position, what is the differentiator between what like investors and VCs will be looking for when they say, okay, cool, we want to invest in an organization that has a co-founder. And primarily a lot of the times that co-founder is somebody that is a technical person. But what if the person is still a technical person and getting the job done and making the product go, but they're not a co-founder? Like, I don't think that there should be any delineating factor there between if an investor invests or not, because they still got the job done. You know, like an example, you either mow the lawn yourself or you hire somebody to do it. What's the end result? It got the job done. So what is the delineating factor between how they view those 2 points when who really cares? As long as the job got done, the product got built, and the company's scaling, who gives a shit?
Oh, they care. Trust me, they care. Because the way how they see it, I mean, they say, okay, I want someone who is basically fair and square, because your cap table talks a lot about the founder. And the way how you're going to distribute your cap table or the shares of your company says a lot about you and your personality and so on. So I am talking out of experience. I have raised money, raised fund for my startup. So basically, I'm not saying this out just because of ideas or opinions. I'm saying this because I met a lot of investors. I have talked to them, and they care about how the shares is going distributed, because they don't want a polluted basically cap table. So my recommendation for you, even if that CTO is getting the job done, which is something actually great, but you're still solo founder in their eyes. It means that you are a person who doesn't accept to work in collaboration. It will be super hard to collaborate with, because after all, if we're going to invest, we're going to invest in people, and these people, they are lone wolves. They don't like to report. They don't can have like people with them who can work collaboratively. It would be super hard actually to basically the data speaks loud that itself. So so that's my recommendation. Matthew, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think there's nothing more that says these founders don't know what they're doing if they don't have a clean cap table, right? So if you personally put money in, you don't buy common stock with your personal money. You buy a safe or you buy preferred stock. You distribute the common equity at 51% among either just the founder first or the founder and co-founder. So the co-founding team has 51% until you get professional investment, and then you have plenty of room to just distribute equity as an incentive when you're cash poor. If you suddenly think, hey, I want this big kahuna and I'm going to give them 25%, 20% of equity or something like that, that only leaves so much equity afterwards. You don't want to be stuck saying, sorry, no equity. We can't give you equity until there's a funding round. That's just bad. You want to have plenty of runway on the equity, but you also want to have control until professional investors come in.
Can I chime in real quick to the earlier discussion? Thank you. Jay was his name, right? Jay, the gentleman who had the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jay, the problem with your analogy, I understand there is a time factor to it. You are going to build Rome and you're not going to mow lawns. So there is a arduous work ahead of you, and you want that important asset not to be leaving your office every day, not knowing whether they will show up the next day or not. So you need to lock them up in some kind of an equity as the discussion was going on. So that's why, even though the end result happens, the lawn gets built, the Rome gets built, there is a time factor to it where safety security is needed of the gentleman or lady showing up consistently to mow the lawn over next 10, 15 quarters, if you will. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah. The person I have is, they have equity. I gave them equity as a CTO technically, but they're just not a co-founder. They're just part of the team that is building the product or whatever. So yeah, for sure.
I believe in the same lately, not a co-founder.
Yeah.
And you can layer it. Founder, maybe 2 or 3 co-founders, co-founding, right? Those are nice things to say about yourself. It makes a resume looks good. But if you're hiring somebody at Series A, you're not going to call them a co-founder. That's misinformation. They might be your CEO, but they're not the founder or the co-founder.
Okay, we could probably go to Christina now.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, perfect. I'm going to go over a brief overview of points when you have co-founders and the points for having co-founders. And then I'm going to go into my personal horrible experience of my co-founding breakup, basically. So some of the support, because I know there's been talk back and forth about why a co-founder or not a co-founder. In the very beginning, there is an increased productivity. You can't run things on your own at the same level as you can if there's two people working on it, especially if you have complementary skills. Also, there is emotional support and morale boost that comes with having a co-founder, having someone on this mission with you, which at times seems impossible. And a lot of times one co-founder is down and really like questioning life and questioning the mission. And then the other co-founder just happens to be super up and positive and kind of carry each other through those times. The other reason I think some of the other mentors touch on this is there's great unicorn companies that were built by co-founding teams and not solos. And examples are Facebook, Apple, and Twitch. Okay, so a few things to consider with co-founders is equity splits, conflicts, that's a big one, skill sets. I would argue that skill sets are important, shouldn't be the primary focus though. Breakups and communication. So equity splits, you want to make sure that all of the co-founders together have a majority of the company. And I believe it was Mash that touched on this. The co-founders should all have 51%. Sometimes this becomes challenging because co-founders usually don't start the company together at day 0 to day 1. A lot of times a co-founder would join up until the end of the first year and still be considered a co-founder because that first year is really toddler years in a startup. And when you want to think about equity splits, personally, in my experience and what I've learned through this process is that equity splits are more motivation factors early on. You are building this humongous, which you hope to IPO and exit at a very large amount. So as a startup founder, you're basically building something that doesn't really exist and you want to have this grand exit. And you need a lot of motivation from the very beginning for that. It's hard to, you're visualizing the finish line, and the equity split really is that carrot that keeps you going through those tough times and is your why a lot of times, because I'm a co-founder and this is my company. And so I often believe that equity splits should be looked at that way rather than skill sets, times, duties, things like that. Those things need to be talked about and discussed. However, I would argue that equity splits are more about motivation and keeping the mission going through those tough times. And also, these are people early on in the very early stages of your company. So it's not someone that's coming in after even a seed round usually, or Series A round. It's someone that's coming in very pre-seed, before that seed. And so that's where the equity split comes in. Conflicts. I am a huge advocate, unfortunately, because of many bad experiences. You decide how you're going to disagree in the very beginning when you're agreeing. It can be a coin flip. I don't care. Whatever it is, you decide how you're going to disagree. You write it down. And then when you disagree, you come back to what you wrote down. Because I guarantee at that moment that you disagree, you're not going to remember on what you agreed on what you're going to do when you disagree. And this can get messy because disagreements can only be understood if there's direct, clear communication. If there's any type of resentment or any type of passive aggressive communication in a co-founder relationship, these things that you've agreed on in peaceful times and happy times really can't be utilized if you're not talking every day. Now, some founders find ways to make this easy as a routine. So you have a stand-up meeting, 10 minutes every morning. And a lot of times that stand-up meeting is not about productivity, it's not about tech, it's not about things like that. It's really just a vehicle to have some of those tough communications. So you've given this space and this time allotment that you're communicating no matter what. And when you do it that way, it takes a lot of pressure off of you emotionally and off of that relationship where you're now giving this box of time for clear, direct communication. I've seen founding teams that go 2 weeks without talking to each other because they're having a conflict. And all that does is obviously kills productivity. And it also creates a space where it's damaging to the relationship. A relationship, especially a co-founding relationship, is only as strong as how you disagree. Like I said, skill sets for me, I think it should be discussed as far as being very intentional as to who is your co-founder. Again, founders tend to bring on people like them because they feel because they're like them, they also believe in the mission and they can get things done. And there's this familiarity and ease, maybe in relationship, maybe in values. However, if nobody has any experience in certain areas in that founding team, you're running a very huge deficit that's going to then require a hire. Maybe there's AI tools that can get it done now. However, I would argue when you're thinking of a co-founding team, you want to be adjacent as far as skill set. A very good example is a tech and a non-tech founder. So the tech founder obviously can code and build a product. The non-tech founder has very in-depth industry experience. That's a perfect combination of skill sets that come together for a co-founding team. And breakups. You know, was it saying no one gets married expecting a divorce to happen? I don't know of any co-founders that come together and say they want to build something, believe in each other, believe in the mission, and expect at some point that a breakup's going to happen. And it's not always a personality or disappointment issue. People get sick, family members die, life circumstances can change. Co-founders can pass away. It's very sad, but it can happen. We are all human. So deciding the parameters of breakups, again, in the very beginning, when everyone is feeling good, the endorphins are high, the communication is at ease, we can actually talk about values and disappointments in a very holistic and happy way in the very beginning, and write these discussions down, write the summations of the discussions down. Make this the blueprint for your agreements. So that way, when the breakup time comes, there's no figuring it out at a very high stressful time. So this just goes a little bit more over what I said. As far as equity, I believe in being very generous in the very beginning. As time goes on, you're obviously not. The hardest time in a startup is, you know, that 0 to 3 years. Vesting periods. Even a co-founder's equity should be earned over years, not right off the bat. A cliff is basically, if you don't make it to a certain point, you get nothing. So generally it's the first year. If a co-founder quits before the first year of their tenure, they walk away with nothing. I think I said before, yeah, I did. The ideal team in my book is a technical and a non-technical co-founder. And in certain situations, most situations, a CEO should have the rights to fire co-founders for not performing. The idea, and the CEO can be one of the co-founders, but the idea is every ship needs a captain. So part of that is having someone that is making a final decision. And so that's really important for that aspect. So what are your next steps, or my to-go-tos is just to reiterate, you need to agree on how you're going to disagree. If it's a coin flip, it's a coin flip. If there's 3 founders, 2 out of 3, that's what it is. If it's by equity majority, that's what it is. And you want to make a decision now when you're starting your co-founding team, even if that's 3 months or a year in, regarding future team members that come in at a co-founder level. So if you start out with 2 co-founders and you decide to bring in a 3rd co-founder, you want to make sure, are we actually bringing in co-founders? Are these people going to have equity, but not going to be co-founders? How are we going to handle fractionals? I would suggest a fractional person is never a co-founder. A co-founder is someone that's full-time in the company. To my definition, to a lot of mentors would argue that. However, some people have a time allotment. So there's agreement that they come in and they're fractional for the first 6 months. And then that gives them, a runway to leave their job, or they're having some personal thing. And then the agreement says, then they're full-time after that. So it's making those decisions now when you're a core team on how new people will come in. So that way, let's say I bring someone in that I've known from a previous startup, I may be a little bit softer on them or want to negotiate or give them more than my co-founder. If we've already made that decision before that person stepped in, it would be a lot easier. And then I'm going to go over a little bit my horrible co-founding breakup story. It was very early in my journey. I made a lot of mistakes. It was in the very beginning stages when we had a in-person event production company and we decided to start building the tech. So I joined the Founders Institute in Miami. That year was 2019, pre-COVID. My co-founder, I met in my PhD program at Gonzaga University. She was one of my peers. She is indigenous and very involved in her tribe. And we had the great idea that we would go after this huge grant. So she would actually hold 51% of the company. And when I started Founders Institute, I learned that was a mistake. So then we talked about splitting and not making that part of the tech company. It would be different. We'd have the event production company and then the tech company separate. We were in the process of doing this, didn't have anything really in writing yet, and COVID hit. Now, during the year up to COVID, she had really promoted herself as a co-founder and COO of our company. And we did produce a lot of events. Big part of our mission was to bring multi-sports to Indigenous and underrepresented people. And so we met that mission. When it came to apply for the big grant, she looked at me and said, I just got tenure. I don't want to do this anymore. In retrospect, there were all the signs that was leading up to that before that point. And I chose to ignore them because I felt I wanted a co-founder. And I also felt that we were on this mission together because we had been through this very intensive PhD program together. And that we had this shared goal because it was serving basically her communities. And I quickly realized that when values and mission breaks, everything breaks. Our communication broke down. The text messages immediately got very passive aggressive. We had said we would never end up being the people that were like, we'll just talk to each other's attorneys. We became those people very quickly, compounded by COVID. Luckily, our races were insured, so everything was covered. That coverage, though, took 2 years to actually arrive. So we went through this lengthy process and didn't talk to each other and had attorneys back and forth. And now everything's fine. We'll never be friends like we were before. I think she took a lot from the experience. So I took a lot from the experience in that you can't outthink these things that have track records of human behavior throughout history. And that's really what both of us were doing. She wanted the notoriety. She wanted to be involved in something outside of her tribe that was national. And she met that. I wanted a co-founder that believed in me and believed in the mission, and quite frankly would do like things like the taxes while I went out and planned events. And again, the 51% was out of complete greed. In reality, she had to stay a part of the company for as long as we were operating that grant, and that was never going to happen in retrospect. And so, so that's my horrible breakup story. Luckily, we didn't build the tech at all under that, so there's no IP issues there. But it did delay the process, and I think we both learned a lot. We're cordial now. We don't hate each other or anything like that. We have had a couple conversations, and but in retrospect, I would have not had to rather have that experience. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing now. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I do. That is good presentation, Christina.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's communication is everything. And when you don't have it, you know, in even as small of a situation to as big as, you know, what we're doing right now. So there's two parts at I guess, well, the first part was when you're talking about, you know, things, life happens. Would you, I was thinking, just because of where I'm at, just thinking about like will. If so, your founders or other people who you brought into the company who own equity, you know, would you have conversations with them about, you know, if something should happen to them, you know, is there something, a conversation that has to do with, you know, a will, or is that still part of the, like a partnership agreement or an equity? Like, what happens if they were to die? What happens to the equity that they've just given you? Like, how do you have that conversation with, and what would you suggest we do about that?
Yeah, some of the other mentors might be more experienced on the legality side, and Mercedes might have more experience in this. But my understanding is that it's in your founding agreements as to if one of the founders dies, what happens. And then a lot of times you can purchase what's called director's insurance for startups very early on. I know any type of insurance is not something that you want to be paying for early in a startup when you don't have customers, you don't have products. But director's insurance can cover certain expenses or certain things when you have one of the founders pass away or get injured or anything like that. So I would suggest like looking into that, but also things like that, deaths of a founder should be part of your documents, your agreements early on when you bring on co-founders, so that it's very much understood. I would not want anyone leaving their equity to their children, especially their minor children or their husbands. And the thing is that this can happen. So it sort of happened in my situation because she had 51%. She turned around and said to me, well, I'm going to sell my equity, my stake in the company. And she hadn't really done anything. I was like, okay. But then I realized, like, I'm not going to work for anyone. Like, I didn't start a company to work for someone I don't know. Like, it's ridiculous. So, you know, sometimes these things have messy ways of working themselves out. And I think if you don't have something in writing, that's what'll end up happening.
Well, then that would also, you know, go to my second point about including a shotgun clause into the agreement, so that if something did happen, that there was like some sort of first right of refusal.
Well, there's
Yeah.
a couple of ways to do those agreements, guys. So first off, let's take the company out of the equation and let's talk about like your personal finances and personal assets. If any of you own your own homes or are close to owning your own home, then you probably want to put that into a trust. And that is a trust is essentially its own entity. And so it's not a person, and it's not a company. It's basically a safeguard if you use a trust correctly. So I'll give you an example. I've been involved in like 2 major lawsuits with companies. One where an employee was hit by another company employee. And so that company employee rented a car from Avis. The company was like a huge medical company. It's like something like Johnson & Johnson. And they also had a subsidiary that they owned. So the employee sued Avis. They sued that other employee directly, like just like his person. They sued essentially for his house and the subsidiary and then the corporation. So they sued 4 people. If that employee, and basically the corporation hung the guy out to dry. right? So his house was like up on the shopping block to pay for the damage that was actually quite rightful. So there was that type of situation. So you need to look at your assets and say, how can I protect them? You never want to put a car in a trust, because a car can split open all your assets, right? So a car should always be separate, because you have to think there's more things that can happen to a driver in a car. But that's why you have like huge insurance for that. Now, when it comes to like passing away, you know, I don't know that I necessarily believe that if someone gets cancer and passes away and they spent 15 years working on a company, that they shouldn't have some type of shares that get bought out or sold or something of that nature. And those are things that you need to work through, right? And maybe that's like a timeline thing. 15 years down to the road when you sell one share to another. But you should think about it, and you should think of like where it goes, right? So maybe maybe your shares just sit aside. Maybe the option goes up for sale at fair market value or whatever the case is, but that could be a cash crunch for the company. So you guys need to think about these different options and talk to an attorney about them.
Yeah, I would like to add, guys, I mean, we are not trying to complicate things for you. We're just actually trying to facilitate things. Not saying that you need to understand everything about legalities and you need to worry about what if this happened, what if that happened. It's always a good practice actually to have an arbitration. That's what arbitration is doing. That to have an attorney, like a corporation attorney, who's going to take care about all these. He's going to take care about the bylaws about the company, about what's going on about it. So you don't have to worry anymore about it, but just focus on growing your business, building cool products, and keep the legalities and other stuff to the lawyers who's going to do them to you. But it's your right actually to understand what's in it. So it's okay to ask your lawyer to have 2 hours meeting with him and ask him all the necessary questions. What if this happened? What if that happened? And I'm sure that he would be happy to explain to you. So yeah, let's just focus.
Yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to point out, and maybe this was covered, so for those of you who are in California or thinking of hiring California employees, but perhaps are not going to pay them, or even worse, like you decide they're contractors, you are playing with fire, right? So in the state of California, basically it's pretty impossible to have a contractor, because the state is very egregious on basically if you require meetings and you talk to the employee, that basically makes them an employee in the state of California. And if you don't pay them employee fees, you are personally liable. So the state of California did something really interesting, and that companies and startups who were not paying people fairly or under contractual status would just go bankrupt and like disappear, or they'd stop working. And so they now hold the corporate officers personally liable. And I have a company actually in the FI portfolio that owes $80,000 to a contractor. They got into a pissing match with the contractor and they decided not to pay him. And so that person went and turned them into the state. And basically, not only if the corporation doesn't pay for it, this person will legally have his wages garnished at any other job or have his assets attacked if he owns a house. And in his case, he actually does have a house, so they're going after that. It doesn't matter, Abduela, if they're in Delaware. If you hire someone who lives in California, you have to go by California state law. It supersedes everything else. I think New York is actually also the same. So keep that in mind as well. You need to know what really constitutes a contractor. A contractor is someone like a plumber. They come in, they do a one-time job that no one in the company can do, right? And the barrier to entry on that is pretty high. There's actually a test that you have to take. And like I said, you can't have salespeople that are contractors. It's illegal.
Yeah, I think it happened because of that gig economy thing that came out, and how they define an employee versus a contractor. So if you're working, if you've given them a laptop and they're using your equipment to work, then basically they're employed by you or something. Just to,
It doesn't even
very
matter
briefly.
if you give them a laptop. They can use their own and still be an employee.
Okay, I mean that's what my attorney told me, that we have to be very careful there. So it happened because of the gig economy. So do we have any other presenter here today? Or maybe not, but yeah, I just want to add my 2 cents worth here. So I had I mean, I still have the company and I still have people working for me. Some of them are overseas, and I mean, some of you might just go, try to get a team overseas where you really want to have them be a part. I mean, there is no equity. You just have to pay them. You can't be dealing with equity there. But I would say just it's very strange that when I was working with somebody in India, and I happen to be from there, but you just don't understand sometimes your own culture. You've been disconnected for a while, and just literally, it was so strange. There were 2 things that happened. Whenever I would talk to them, and this is like about 15 years ago, whenever I would talk to them, they would say, "No issue, ma'am." And I never understood what that meant. And soon I figured out that no issue means, okay, everything will be done, because that's how things are. No issue means no issue. You just have things done. Then I understood that the culture there is to say yes to everything. Whether it can be done or not, you just say yes. And then it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, kind of a deal. And you just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it never got done." And so I never understood that, even though I thought I understood the culture very well. And the second thing that was really strange, I was working in another country, in Philippines, with somebody, and I just, one day I just was very miffed, and I said, "Oh, I hate to tell you this." And then I didn't hear from that person for a while. And I realized, and then I talked to him and I said, "Hey, what happened? I mean, you didn't show up for the meetings and stuff like that." And he said, "Oh, well, you used the word hate." And I never understood what that meant. But for them, it's a very cultural thing. Love carries a very different meaning, and so does hate. So when you said, when you say hate, we just say it very casually, and no big deal. But for them, it carries a very different meaning. So that's what I feel, that if you are planning to have a team or anybody overseas, you have to acknowledge the cultural differences. You educate yourself to whatever their norms are, but in the whole process, you make your company values very clear to them, that how you make decisions, how do you give feedback. And I actually had to tell these people in India that, whenever I would say, we want this, and they would say no issue, then finally I figured out, and I would say, no, there is an issue, and we want it hot. And that's how, I broke the ice, versus, I'm the employer and they're the employees. So they just have to go by whatever, even if I'm talking nonsense, they'll just say, "Yes, ma'am." So yes, just be careful there. And just, if there's some sort of a cultural difference, please write things down. Just send them in an email or in diagrams, so that they understand. Sometimes they don't understand your language very well. And you kind of create an environment where it's okay for them to ask questions, because sometimes they just, out of fear or whatever, they just don't ask questions. And you have to understand that, yes, they are going to be cultural differences, and culture doesn't mean how, it's not just nationality, it's how people think, how they solve problems, how they speak. So everything, and comes in culture. So you just have to give them that space to grow, and then they will be literally, I mean, I have actually 2 people on my team who've been with me for the past 15 years. And when they came, they were raw as anything. So I think giving them the respect of their own culture and teaching them yours, I think it makes a lot of difference. So if you are going to go overseas, please be mindful. That's all. So on that note, I think we can go to breakout rooms.
Can you put me in a breakout room? I hit the ignore button.
Yeah, I think I need to. Yeah, can you put me in the breakout room too, Christina? Or I am in room. I'm not sure.
So am I supposed to be here or I should be in the room? I can't hear you. You're mute actually if you're speaking.
You should be able to move to breakout room number 2.
I don't see any join breakout room. Okay, number 2. Okay.